well, as he puts it, literally life or death for our country. The case centres around whether he has the authority to impose sweeping tariffs on imports under a law designed for use during a national emergency. So has Donald Trump's one-man trade war against the world finally met its legal limit? International trade law and policy attorney Timothy Brightbill is trade practice co-chair at Wiley. Thank you very much for joining us, Tim. Great to see you this morning. Oral arguments, what do you think are the odds? Which way is this likely to go?
Well, there's no way to predict. I think it's fair to say that this argument, which will start less than 30 minutes from now, is the biggest trade case the Supreme Court has ever heard. And it does go straight to the key constitutional issue of who has the power to impose tariffs, Congress or the president. President Trump says the law that he used, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, gives him the power to regulate imports, and that includes the power to impose tariffs, including fentanyl tariffs on China, Canada, and Mexico, and reciprocal tariffs on nearly all other countries. The plaintiffs in this case say that Congress has this power and can't delegate this power, and that IEEPA, which has never been used before to impose tariffs, does not include that power or that authority.
I mean, if it doesn't include that authority, and if this ruling goes against him, what does that mean, practically speaking?
Well, there are two practical implications. First of all, it's critically important because the United States, of course, has already collected hundreds of billions of dollars in tariff revenue. And based on those tariffs, it has now reached reciprocal trade agreements with many of our major trading partners. So a ruling in this case could affect all of those tariffs that have already been collected. And that being said, the president has other laws, other tools in the toolbox. I'm very confident there's a plan B here if the court rules against President Trump. Tariffs are going to be a centerpiece of this administration's economic policy, and I think it's best for businesses and companies to plan on that going forward, regardless of how this case comes out.
So tariffs are here to stay in one form or another, sectoral or whatever that might look like. But I want to go back and pick up on something particularly relevant for our viewers, which is what are the implications of a ruling if it goes against the administration for those trade deals that are already done? Because the leverage there was all about the threat of tariffs. And if they can't impose that, then does that mean the other side of the trade deal partners won't live up to kind of the terms of that?
Now, I think it's likely that most countries that have spent time and effort negotiating these deals with the United States will continue to stand by those. I think it's important for businesses and for industries to have certainty about what's going to happen, about what the tariff levels will be going forward. So I don't expect that countries will back away from these very carefully negotiated reciprocal agreements with the United States in the near future. There would most likely be a refund process for all of those importers that did pay tariffs if the tariffs are struck down. But again, it's a very close question. There were 4 judges in the lower court that held that the tariff power was acceptable for the president to use. And it's quite likely that a majority of this Supreme Court could find the same way.
I was going to say, you know, where does this... I was talking to a company that is involved in bringing this challenge. And to him, obviously, it's all about business, but it does raise some much broader constitutional questions. Can you talk us through some of those?
Sure. Well, Congress very clearly is the party, is the entity under the Constitution that is given the power to impose tariffs, but Congress arguably has the power to delegate that to the president. And the question is, for this law, was the delegation appropriate or was it inappropriate for Congress to pass that power on to the president? And then similarly, for this law, IEEPA, a law that was used very quickly at the very start of the Trump administration, does this law, which gives the president the power to regulate imports, also include the power to impose tariffs? This law has never been used before to impose tariffs, but the president would say that the power to regulate imports does include the power to impose tariffs. So that's the key question. I expect to hear the justices ask very challenging questions of both sides on that critical issue.
I mean, Tim, very briefly, because we're almost out of time, what happens if the Supreme Court rules very narrowly? In other words, they say, in this particular instance, it was inappropriate, but kind of leaves that power in place?
Well, I think that is a possibility. I tend to think that the court would either rule, yes, the tariffs are acceptable, or no, they're not, rather than to try and get in the business of making decisions over which tariffs are and are not acceptable. But we'll have to see how it goes. It's a very close case. That's why we're all watching it so closely this morning.
Timothy Brightbill from Wiley & Partners, thank you so much for basically shedding us light and talking us through that today.
Thank you.